Welcome to this seventh day, Saturday of the week of Advent, where we have been talking about hope. I spent some time recently in the first chapter of Colossians, and this particular passage really struck me. In verse 27, to them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of his mystery. Of course, he's speaking about the Israelites making known to the Gentiles who he was. And he says, this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. He is describing how the purpose of Christ's coming, the gift of God to us, is that we would receive that and gain for ourselves that anticipation of the future of what God will be providing for us in His presence, in His glory. And it is God's purpose that we obediently follow Him. Let's review very briefly the passage that we've been looking at this week as we have studied from the book of Isaiah, 8th century prophet, who described the people of Israel as walking in darkness, but then they saw a great light. And those in darkness had this light to dawn upon them, and life changed for them. They enlarged their nation, their joy was increased, and he gives to us several images of how people rejoiced in that ancient day. The harvest season was always a place and time for rejoicing. If you'll remember the book of Ruth, there's a beautiful picture there at the threshing floor, how that story unfolds where Ruth and Boaz are made known to one another, and they were there for the purpose of having a celebration because the harvest was in. Also, he talked about warriors who divide up the plunder after a victory. Then he gives us the historical event of Midian taking 300 men and shattering the enemy and freeing the people so that they no longer had the burdens or had a bar across their shoulders or had the rod of oppression. And then he gives to me one of the most unusual descriptions when he describes the warrior's boot, how it is burned, indicating that the war is over, we are victorious. And then he gives us that image of Christ being born, that which he prophesied for to us a child is born, a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And he goes on to describe his kingdom. How is all of this going to be accomplished? Well, he describes and gives us the answer in that last verse when he says, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. And it is with gratitude that we understand that it's the zeal of the Lord who makes good out of bad difficulties and circumstances. The story of Joseph. Jacob's sons, as you remember, took Joseph and put him into a pit, selling him, then going back and telling their father that he had been killed. Well, he ended up being in Pharaoh's camp, and Pharaoh saw what kind of person he was. He was elevated to a place of prominence among the people of God, and ultimately becomes the one who provides so that they are redeemed. And you recall perhaps the meeting of Joseph and his sons, Joseph and his brothers, when Jacob comes back to Egypt in order to get grain for his starving family. And Joseph looks at his brothers and he says, "You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good." I've always viewed this as a portrait of the people of God, that they were the favored people, as Joseph was the favored son. Joseph went from the pit to the palace. Well, God's people are given that responsibility to move in life so that they are the people who are the redemptive call of God to the world. However, they failed in their mission. And we know in this story, similar stories like that of Daniel, Esther, and Ruth, how those who were not even thought to be possible elevated to leadership to provide salvation for God's own people. Well, hope comes in many ways and in many places. And I have found some interesting stories and met some interesting people who have given me hope. Maybe you are have seen this picture. This is a picture of Steve Mitchell, who for 37 years sat behind Coach K, the beloved coach of the Duke basketball team. He was there because he wanted for Christmas. All he wanted for Christmas was to be able to go to a Duke basketball game. It so happened that his brother was renovating the house of Coach K. And one day he asked him the question, "How could I give my brother his wishes for Christmas?" And the coach said, "Well, what is it that he wants?" And he told him he wanted just to be able to attend a Duke basketball game. Well, Coach K gave him a season ticket and a place to sit right behind him. For 37 years, when Coach K came into this to coach the game, here was Steve Mitchell, a special needs man, sitting behind him. And every time he came in, he looked him in the eyes as he is here, and shook his hand, because all that Steve wanted was to be at a ball game, and Coach K gave him the hope of his life. Well, Steve, in his own rights, was a hero, because he was, when you saw his sister having a seizure in the pool and would have drowned if he had not called called the medics. He saved her life by his calling the medics. Well, this picture gives hope to a lot of people of the special ways that people reach out and care for people like Steve, who was a special needs young man. I love this story because it reminds me that there is hope in places sometimes we don't even expect it. When we were looking for a house here, as I stated in the text to your left, we were looking for a house but found a treasure and a new friend who has an inspiring story. Now, we met him briefly, have not been able to keep up with him, but this is Matthew, and he tells his story in a book that he told us about and gave us a copy, a book that he and his mother and I think his brother put together. And I love how he describes his life. He too was a special needs young man in the church, in the First Baptist Church of Trussville. We have a place there called the Independence Place, and special needs kids come there every day, but they also come on Sunday and worship. And scattered throughout our church are these special needs kids that are a blessing to us as we see them. I have a special needs woman about my age who every holiday, every special day, I can expect a call from her wishing me the best. She is a person who's been in my life a number of years, but as the years come and go, I always anticipate her calling. And for me, it is always hopeful when I see and hear these kind of stories. As we make our way toward Christmas Day of our study on hope, Christ in us, as I read from the Colossians, is now declared to be the hope of glory. Hope is that joyous expectation or anticipation. Glory is that which we will belong to, or which will belong to the Christian in the heavenly state. The general truth is that Christ living in the believer is the ground for certainty for complete salvation, where the Spirit is designated as the deposit guaranteeing our inheritance. In this letter, Christ himself occupies the sphere that Paul elsewhere gives to the Spirit. And so we are his hope in our world. He is our hope that came to the world. He became our Savior as he came into the world. But we have a place and a mission as we continue to be that hope in our world as we become and are shining lights in the midst of a dark world. I hope that this will be a time that you will celebrate what Christ has done in the gift that he brings to us, and that you will be able to celebrate his coming and recognize what he has done for us. And as we approach this last day, and as we look at this last day, we want to be the best that we can be as we march the conclusion of this particular week. Beginning tomorrow, we will talk about the peace that comes. And we do so greatly need peace individually and collectively as people of this world. I thought this was a good prayer to conclude our message